meeting of the Infrastructure Services and Networks Committee. Thank you all for being here today and your attendance. We have no matters, I understand, under the public forum today, so we'll go straight into apologies. I've got two apologies, one from Andrew Wiley and Councillor Wiley and one from Councillor Elder. I'll happily move those. Seconded, Councillor Lord. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I'm just going to suggest an alternative process today. We're going to put item 5 as item 8 after Waste and Environment. That's Property Services. We've got a new manager, and I think he'd probably appreciate seeing how the process works before he has to appear. So, if that's all right, with that amendment, I'll move the confirmation of the agenda. And with, sorry, option C, yes, sorry, as per the order paper. Thank you. Thank you. That's the one in regarding Standing Order 2.1. You're happy with that? Thank you. Councillor Staines. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. The next matter is declaration of interest. Are there any changes or alterations to be noted? No. Then I'll move. We just confirm the proposed management plan for the elected members' interests. All in favour, please say aye. 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 Against? Carried. The reports. So we're moving to item 6 with Three Waters Activity Report. Welcome, General Manager.
Thank you. My colleague is on annual leave at the moment, so sorry. Thank you, Mum. My colleague is on annual leave at present, so you have me.
Anything you wish to talk about?
No, take it as read. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Lord?
Yeah, look, I'll just refer to page 26, point 27. It says compliance for wastewater discharges was at 94%. And then I see on number 29, Seacliff, after a long period of non-compliance, was compliant in June due to a change in the consent limit. Now, I'm just wondering what that means. Does that mean the bar has been lowered so that we can... Is that code for the... We've just lowered the bar so we become compliant?
No, I wouldn't phrase it that way, but my understanding is that the volumes have increased, but I'll confirm that for you.
The volumes of...
The amount of discharge allowed, but I'll get my technical guys to confirm that for you.
Yes, please, if you could. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Badvis.
On page 23, the percentage response times, less than 24 hours. Why are they so much worse than previous year?
So, Councillor, can you just refer me to the paragraph that you're looking at there?
It's the graph on figure 2, item 12. Figure 2, percentage response times met less than 24 hours, near the top of page 23.
So when I look at paragraph 13, the staff have provided the rationale about why those numbers have decreased in performance regarding turnover with the contractor's own staff, and they realised that the breakages in winter were more than usual, so that's their explanation.
So are you saying that we got a different contractor this year to last year?
No, I'm saying staff within the contractor, they've lost staff and they've had to replace them with new staff, and they're on a learning curve.
So that's a contractor issue that's become a problem for us. Have they worn penalties as a result?
No, there have been verbal discussions with them and undertakings for improvement, but no penalties as such.
Thank you.
Councillor Steadman.
Thank you. Just page 27, number 34, the coastal erosion there. Just since any idea of costings with possibly since last winter really of the rocks and the sand that have been dumped down there or moved around?
No, but I can get your figure, so this is the sand sausages, a cost for the last 12 months, was it you're after?
Not the sand sausages, just the sand and the rocks that have been manipulated around. And just another question, how often are these meetings with the Sinclair Action Group? It would be nice to know how often they are as well, please. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Just a clarification around point 27, where there's a portion of non-compliance was technical in nature for water discharge compliance. And it says one example led to multiple technical non-compliances. Can you tell me how that happened? Or how that leads to multiple?
Yeah. The sample that was missed is used for about 5 different measures, and so because they didn't have the sample as the base data, they couldn't do any of the 5 measures.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Page 27, just a point of clarification. I see that the RFP to engage an artist has been issued. Do we have any idea of interest in that at this stage and what the timing is and so forth?
Last time I received an update, I thought we had received several expressions of interest, but I'll get the number and quantify that back to you, Councillor.
Any further questions or discussion, Councillor Benson-Pope?
In respect of paragraph 13, there's this reference to the continued focus on the quality of pavement reinstatement to reduce the activity's impact on the transport network. I wondered if someone could tell me in English what that means. I just don't understand.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor, it means that when we reinstate the pavement after waterworks, we don't drop it down by 2 inches, so you get a bumpy ride in the car.
So the transport network is both for vehicles and footpath pavement or whatever.
Yes, it is. So on footpaths, it'd be more to do with trip and falls, where in the road surface, it's more to do with vehicle ride.
That's fine. I now understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, I'm happy to move that the report be noted. Thank you. Second, Councillor O'Malley. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I didn't see. I thought I'd report. Apologies.
I just wanted to make a comment. It's very good in nature. It's just to see the work that's getting done, and I think the spending CapEx this year is going to be probably pretty so.
Excellent. Thank you. Next on the agenda is item 7, page 30, Waste and Environmental Solutions Activity Report. Welcome, Mr. Henderson. Would you like to introduce your report or take it as read?
I'm happy to just take it as read.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Gary.
Yes, I have several. Thank you. The first one is just to ask how the government's announcement re single-use plastic bags will affect plans in the waste minimisation space for the city.
Obviously, it was up to consultation, and the direct impact isn't, so for argument's sake, it won't affect rubbish bags at all. The plastic ban is only for items basically purchased from stores that are designed to carry sold goods, so it doesn't actually affect the likes of rubbish bags or anything else like that. However, obviously, we are already in the process of evaluating whether plastic rubbish bags is the right method for us. There's a lot of complications around that. Probably one of the biggest benefits for us would help to remove soft plastics from our recycling initiative. So a lot of soft plastics end up in our recycling bins, even though we can't do anything with them. So it would actually help with our recycling initiatives.
Thank you. Second question is on page 32, paragraph 13. It talks about the Whakahiki service that went from a place for people to drop things off whenever to a drop-off service. And I note that the number of residents using the facility has been dropping. Do you have any intelligence on why that number's dropping?
No, unfortunately, I can't give you any good reason for that. It's been feedback from the contractor that they're just seeing less.
So have we connected with the community board and the local community to find out what's happening there?
No, not yet. We haven't. obviously part of the Waste Futures project that we're working on is actually what our service levels are going to look like. So at this point in time, no, I haven't re-engaged with the community board.
Okay. And the final one was around page 35, 38 and 39, the OUSA Expo Day. What kind of level of interest was there from students in the stand? Or the information?
Right. I understand from our Education Promotions Officer they had a lot of interest actually, especially in regards to the recycling game and that sort of thing that we actually have there. So quite a good engagement. That's the kind of thing that helps actually get them interested in it. And we've had a lot of good engagement from the union as well, from the student union. So yes, the feedback we had was that was good.
So will you, on page 37, as areas of focus in the next quarter, and the second point there, be looking at the university for those workshops that you're planning?
Which was it? Oh,
Page
the
37.
compostable. So the sustainable living, we can target students in that, but most of the students don't have any area for compost or anything else. But so that's a bit wasted in that area. But for the sustainable living, as in the reducing food waste, that sort of thing, we engage them.
So Bakashi buckets and so forth wouldn't be?
Yeah. But actually, composting, there's not much use to them.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, Chris, I just wanted to know, or can you tell me a wee bit more about the gas fill collection? I mean, it's very clear what's happened there. You've upgraded and put some more wells in, but I was wondering, can you tell us how much gas you're recovering and how usefully that's being used?
Well, I can't give you figures off the top of my head. I do know that we've improved the amount of gas that we'll be collecting by about 50% from the landfill itself. The gas engine...
So you've increased it by 50%?
Yeah, the gas that we're actually been collecting it. Prior to the recent full recondition of the gas engine at Green Island Wastewater Treatment Plant, it was operating at around 200 kilowatts.
So that's how much?
How much electricity it's producing on an average. It goes up and down depending on the gas supply. Yeah. We're now averaging 250 kilowatts of electricity production from that plant, and continuing improvements, so obviously we can continue to push that figure up.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was actually after, so you did it. Oh. You did know, yep, thank you. Yeah, I know it's there, just didn't see.
Is that all your questions, Councillor Lord?
Yep, thank you.
Councillor Vandervis?
On page 36, the capital projects, there are some remarkable differences between what was budgeted and what has actually come up as the actual year to date. Gas collection that we've just been talking about, there was no budget, but you spent 44 grand. Can you explain why it is that budgeting is so much varied from what actually has happened? What are the reasons that the budget is almost irrelevant to what's been spent?
The main reason, well, there's multiple reasons. One of the main reasons being they've only got one landfill engineer, so if he's working on the gas system, he's not working on anything else. So other planned improvements basically have just had to be postponed until he's got time available to perform scoping exercises. That doesn't mean that work still needs to be done, it just means we haven't been able to do it when we scheduled it.
So at year end, are you anticipating that the budget will be a bit more fully spent, or do you think that these timing issues will continue through to the next financial year?
So we're not doing any carry forward, so this obviously at the end of the financial year it will still be significantly underspent, and we won't be carrying anything forward into this financial year that we're in now.
So given that there is such a big difference between budget and what's actually spent, are you going to change the way you approach budgeting next year?
We already have, in fact, actually. It's actually we're getting far more detailed on our capital expenditure so that we can actually be far more realistic in the forecasting of what we can achieve.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hawkins?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Just picking up on Councillor Gary's question around the announcement by the Prime Minister around the phasing out of single-use plastic bags. And I take your point that it is silent on rubbish bags, the consultation document, and is focused on shopping bags, but it is a consultation document. So is it not still possible that the outcome of that will be that our curbside collection service would be within the scope of that phase-out process?
After consultation, it could well be. At the moment, the way the consultation is worded, it's pretty much talking about the weight of plastic bags, but it's still only referring to bags produced for the carrying of sold goods. So at the moment, rubbish bags would be completely outside the scope of the consultation document as well. That doesn't mean that things couldn't change during that consultation process.
And it's also possible that we could choose to make that decision for reasons other than doing the bare minimum that is required by legislation.
Yeah, although I would caution that until we've actually completed the Waste Futures project, we wouldn't want to race into any decisions until we've actually got the full picture of the services we want to provide. Some areas of Dunedin, for argument's sake, the central business district, we need to it's not suitable for actual having bins in that area. We'd need to figure out how we provide services to that area, if indeed we continue to provide services to that area. There's a lot of those businesses, they don't have any space to put a waste bin as such, so they would have to leave it on the street all the time. We need to figure out how would we address those issues in those areas.
Just on that, at what point are you anticipating that options will come back to this committee or council around what our curbside collection offering will look like from July 1 of next year?
I'll be giving, there'll be an update to the October INSCOM committee, and then a final report on preferred options coming to the early December full council meeting.
Okay. As part of the annual plan budget process?
They are yet to be confirmed exactly what that consultation is going to look like, but that'll be the options that we're looking at consultation for in 2019, early 2019. Yep.
Thank you. I've got two more. One is a similar question around the inner city recycling facilities. At what point you're anticipating having options as to where they may go?
We've got 4 good sites now identified and agreed with Otago University and with the Otago Polytech for another 4 sites down there. And trying to remember the last conversation I had with Lee, I'm pretty sure we've now got 4 preferred locations in the rest of the around the central area of Dunedin as well. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember where they are exactly. But I know we've narrowed it. We've been going through a good process, and we've narrowed it down, and we've now got sites identified where we could put the recycling hub. So we're hoping to have 2 to 4 under construction, if not constructed, by the end of this financial year.
Oh, out of a short list of 8 sites, is it 4 in the north end and 4 in the rest of the CBD?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going back to that table on capital projects just to ask you, how many wheelie bins do we get for 66,000? Well, roughly. I mean, obviously, you'd be telling the contract price, but I mean, it's funny that we had 0 budgeted and we ended up spending 66,000.
Yeah, I couldn't actually give you a figure off the top of my head, to be honest with you. Sorry, and I wouldn't want to guess in case I gave you something completely inaccurate.
Okay. Was that fact that there was nothing budgeted and then we didn't spend that? Is this something that we're going to be readdressing next year? Was this an issue with knowing how many we had in stock or something? Or was there a run on them?
When we started the contract back in, I'm trying to remember, 2011 or 2013, 2011, we had a whole lot of extra recycling bins in stock, and basically last year we ran out of that stock, and for the first time we've had to start buying bins again to get them out there. The life of the bins themselves is between 8 to 10 years, depending on how often they get blown over by the wind or etc. Normally they should last about 10 years. Mm-hmm. So we're at the point now where we've run out of spares, and they're starting to fall apart a bit on us.
Cool. And then my next question's on the Waikouaiti transfer station as the councillor on the Waikouaiti Community Board. How much of that allocated 90,000 is put aside for design, and how much is put aside for construction? Do you know roughly?
No, we haven't actually split it at all. We've basically got the money allocated, and it's because we don't know exactly what we're wanting to do. The only thing that we know for sure is that we need to cap that final capping of the landfill.
Which has got the 50,000.
Yeah, the rest of it is depending on what is actually going to go in there. Will change the ratio between the design and the build costs.
Okay, and that'll be somewhat influenced by the communication with the community.
Yes, so we're in contact with the community. They've come back to us. We've got some good ideas. We need to meet with them and actually try and formalise exactly what they're trying to, what they want. Yeah.
Thanks.
No other questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Hawkins.
Well, thank you. It's and my apologies for not mentioning this before, but it's a process question around the MFE's consultation document, and that closes on the 14th of September, which is in advance of this committee meeting again, and it's probably too late to try and muscle it into the agenda of the council meeting on the 28th of August. There are two committee meetings on the 11th of September, Economic Development and Finance and CCOs. Would it be anticipated that our draft submission on that would come to either of those meetings for discussion?
I doubt that's actually been considered yet, or alternatively it can be delegated and then brought back to ISCOM later, which would be the normal practice. I think it would be within, for a chair to sign off and then to bring it back for noting.
Yeah, I understand how we've done it. I also appreciate there's a reluctance to retrospectively approve things.
Yes, appreciate that.
So if we can avoid doing that, that would be preferable.
If you're happy for it to either go to economic development or to, yeah, I mean, it'd be fine to go to any of those. Yeah, finance or economic development. Thank you. I noted, and I'm sure the staff will make sure that that happens. Mr Henderson, one question from me. It's great that you're doing workshops and everything on other areas. Just wondering, are there any plan for agri waste and baleage wrap, which I don't think have ever taken place in my time on council, and yet we're hearing that landfills are becoming, non-licensed landfills are becoming a real issue?
So as part of our consultation on the WMMP, we've had both AgPac and I forgot the name of the other, PlasPac. We had them both involved in our stakeholder engagement for the rural community. They're looking to hold some events down in the Otago region. They were basically stating that they're happy to co-locate on our transfer stations in rural areas. They are still disappointed at the lack of engagement they've been getting from Otago farmers, and they also are not prepared to accept stuff, us collecting on their behalf, because they want to inspect, especially when it comes to chemicals and that sort of thing. So to answer your question, we're talking to them, we're engaged with the companies that are actually doing those schemes, but at the moment we don't have any specific plans.
So you're not considering doing any workshops which may get that engagement up?
Oh, yeah, so yeah, we're planning an event with them. They want to come to Otago and do a collection and workshop. I haven't got a date for that.
Well, I hope that they'll be planned well before October, only for the time that people are doing baleage, because I gather it depends on what sort of baleage wrap you use.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you answer that. Okay. But yeah, I know the plans are underway, but I couldn't give you a date, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Hall, did you have a question? Oh, sorry. No other questions? I'm happy to move the report be noted. Any seconded? Thank you, Councillor Staines. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Mr Bainbridge, welcome. We're now going to item 5, which is Property Services Activity Report. Page 15. Congratulations on your new appointment. I hope you've met many of the councillors here. Very good. Do you want to talk at all to your report?
No, that's fine. Happy to go to questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Vandervis.
On the bottom of page 17, it talks about commercial tenants being re-tenanted in July. Is that of this year or last year, or next year?
That's Last month.
It happened already?
Yeah, that's happened already.
Okay. On the next page, page 18, major initiatives under 18, it talks about a panel of suppliers, and these being Steve Mowat, Building Construction and Logic Group. Can you just explain to me what this panel of suppliers is? Is it preferred contractors? What does the term panel of suppliers actually mean?
So in this case, anytime a community house becomes vacant, there'll always be a degree of works that needs doing to make it ready for the next tenant to move in. So we've gone to these two suppliers who alternate now for each house that becomes vacant.
So if one house becomes vacant, one does it, and then the next house becomes vacant, the other one does it?
Yep.
And then do you have a member of staff who compares the performance of them? And
we'll decide, yeah, over the course of I believe it's a 12-month contract. 3-year contract. We'll be able to ascertain performance levels on the two and make a decision next time we go to market.
And that contract, is that a kind of a fixed amount contract, or does it depend on the number of vacancies that they need to deal with?
I don't know. I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Cool.
Councillor Hawkins?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. My question's around point 20, the South Dunedin hub, where it says, quote, the first stage is to engage a suitably qualified and experienced project manager responsible for identifying an appropriate site. I was of the understanding that Council had already identified for one, if not two, options for the development of that. So at what point, are we re-litigating that process now? Is that what's happening?
No, we're not re-litigating, but the sites that have been previously identified may not be available, may not be suitable, so it's trying to narrow it down to the choices that Council have previously identified, trying to select one to actually really move ahead with now.
And will that decision be made by Council or by the aforementioned project manager?
It'll be made by Council.
And similarly, where it says scoping the services and functions that will sit within the hub, could he also read services and functions that could sit within the hub, subject to decisions made by Council as to what we see the purpose of that facility being?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Councillor O'Malley?
Thanks. I've just got a question around your commercial occupancy rates. More a case of, are they calculated, percentage of occupancy, is that calculated as number of units or square meterage of commercial space? And then following with that question, how many commercial units do we actually own?
So it's number of tenants? Yeah. And I wouldn't want to guess, 100 and something. Yeah.
How you doing there? Thank you. Hey, look, I noticed on the start of the report, page 4, it says the property services activity includes facilities and asset management, land and tenancy management, and then I noticed over in point 19, it says that there's a program of building assessments. There's a program of building assessments being carried out, which includes condition and seismic assessments. Is that particularly all the non-commercial, well, I suppose non-commercial, the buildings like this, I suppose it's got a commercial value, but this building, the library and all those buildings, they're all being assessed at a high level to see exactly where they sit in terms of asbestos, in terms of what needs done, lift shafts and all that sort of stuff. So that's being done.
Yeah.
Yep. Do you know when that work will be finished?
So the condition surveys for what we would term our main buildings have all been done.
Yep.
We're kind of going over now the less important buildings. There might be kind of vacant sheds that we've got here, there and everywhere.
Yep.
But buildings like this have been done. What we're moving through to now are asset condition surveys. So while we've done a condition survey of the shell of the building, roof, floors, walls, windows, we're now moving into an asset condition analysis of what are the boilers like, how long are they going to last, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So at what stage would you expect to know? I mean, I think it's fairly easy to say, for example, the building next door, where all the staff are, has probably had a shortage of maintenance on it, probably hasn't been maintained as well as it should be. At what stage will you know when that needs, or how much we'll need to spend to get that building up to a sort of a satisfactory level?
We would hope we'll have something in the next 10-year plan. That would be a really, good idea of what amount we'll have to spend to bring that building up to a good state. And we'll link that in with the library because it's kind of one complex.
Now, just one other question about the library, but every time I've walked in there lately, the escalator's broken down. Now, I'm not saying that's a major loss, but have you got plans to either fix or remove that escalator?
Remove it.
Yep, so it's coming out.
Yep.
Okay.
As soon as the lift works are done and the lifts are all working and all good, we'll look to remove the escalator there.
Oh, yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Page 17, just a point of clarification. Can you tell me, just explain the public housing waiting list, which is obviously different from priority 1, 2 and 3? I didn't quite understand the difference.
So essentially that's priority 4. So you're not over 55 and you don't have low income. You class as public housing, so that's open to anyone, you, me, anyone who wants to go on.
And how do those waiting lists, the breakdown, how does that compare with previous years? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head. It's not the worst it's ever been, but it's worse than it was kind of 10 years ago.
Thank you. And on page 19, next steps and the focus for the next quarter, C talks about the demolition of buildings at 3 sites. Which buildings would those be?
So that's the Four Corners building at 30 Thomas Burns in the car park there, the building at 91 Dukes Road, and a building at 679 Kaikorai Valley Road.
Thank you.
No other questions? In case, I'll move the report be noted. Seconded, Councillor Hall. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Next item is the Parks and Recreation Activity Report. Welcome back, Mr. West. Page 40. Would you like to speak to your reporter on your holiday or anything else? Or have you just take questions?
I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions on the report? Councillor Gary?
Welcome back, Mr. West. And I had a couple of questions, and possibly this is addressed later on in your report, but the Tauroni project, it's great to see where that's up to. How would you articulate the timing of that currently in terms of delivery? Do we have any sense of that?
We're moving on quite a tight timeline at the moment. We're hoping to get the consultation. So we've already had one round of consultation on Queen's birthday. Yep. And the community are pushing us quite hard to move quickly.
Was there good engagement at the...
Yeah, so there were over 40 people attended that Queen's birthday session. There is a further one scheduled for September with the aim of, by the time we get to Labour weekend, we've started to put some really concrete plans in place for the community to look at.
And one of my other questions was around, just clarification, page 43, paragraph 14, the playground assessment. I note there's a new piece of playground equipment at Ralpham Park in McKendree Bay, and I'm assuming that's been put in by community funds because No, that was part of the playground replacement work that was done and took quite some time in the last financial year. So there were a number of items across the city that were upgraded. Thank you. And my final question was around the volunteer projects. Great to see how they've developed. How would you articulate the level of engagement from local people?
I think it's pretty good. I think we're very lucky. Catherine Hosted's a fantastic advocate for volunteer programs and is really getting teams engaged across the city. And we've just started. I mean, she works, as you'll be aware, across DOC as well. So I think the fact that it's cross-agency also assists with that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. West, on page 44, item 23 mentions the predator-free funding decision. Has that come out yet, or subsequent to this report being written, or are we still awaiting that?
We're still awaiting that, yes.
And we don't have any time frame?
There is a meeting scheduled for later this month, and I think we're hoping to have an announcement fairly short.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. And totally different subject, page 46, item 48, Freedom Camping thing. Have you seen the recommendations of the Ministerial Working Group?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's obviously too early because we don't know what the Minister will do with those. But I take it that that's helping to inform some of our thinking. It seems to me there's some
so
quite...
further to the workshop we had with you all in early July, where and I've been away on leave for 3 weeks, so we've got a meeting scheduled within Parks to summarise that workshop and some of the findings, and then we'll be putting an action plan together, getting ready for the coming year and what are the options.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins. That wasn't you, was it?
No, good to see our local media are very actively engaged in the meeting, though. I had a question around the predator-free thing too, but secondly, around the Moana pool stuff, the hydroslide redevelopment or various other things, just making sure that any capital works or any planning that's going on in the short term won't preclude us from doing any work on that site around district energy initiatives, which obviously won't be before the hydroslide gets replaced in 2019-20. So is that something that is being factored into how that space might operate in the medium term?
Yeah, I mean, the hydroslide work or any of the other capital work that's going on and planned for this year won't compromise any of that work.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions on the Parks and Recreation report? If not, I'll happily note that report as well. Seconded, Councillor O'Malley. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And you're here for the next report as well?
Oh, well, I'll just sit here quietly.
Yeah, Mosgiel Aquatic Facility update.
Yeah. So this is just for noting, unless people have got questions, it was just to give you all an update on where we're going and how we're travelling, basically.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Lord. Page 50?
Yeah.
Yep. It's on the appendix.
Yeah.
54.
Now, I'm just trying to work out what that I see the orange boundary line.
Yeah.
So is that the area that will be designated?
Yes.
So can I ask the process? I don't quite understand why you would designate that large area when we've already diagnosed a site that we want to have to pull on.
So, well, the aim of the decision was made back in December to go for designation across the wider site because the advisory panel felt that it gave us more flexibility as a council moving forward. The actual final siting of the pool is still something that is up for discussion because the advisory panel want to do due diligence and absolutely make sure we've got the correct site for it.
If I may, can I ask who is responsible or who will make that final decision as to the location?
So there's work going on with the advisory panel at the moment as that piece of work.
So that's members of the trust, some councillors,
plus 3 councillors
and staff. Yep.
Yeah.
So what concerns me when I look at that picture is, for example, the gardens there that have previously been ruled out. Are you suggesting that site might come back in?
Not necessarily the gardens itself, because it obviously has to look at. I mean, the gardens are quite a popular community recreational facility, so we're not going to be building a pool on the park.
Just for clarity, can I just understand, my understanding, which may be incorrect, is that the designation you're talking about is for recreational pursuits, not just for the pool.
Yes.
So it's a wider arching.
It's for the wider arching thing.
Yeah.
But it, of course,
means that you can coordinate parking within that whole site.
Yeah.
It's not just the pool will go somewhere in there and it may be separately mentioned when it comes to the designation process.
Yeah, okay. So I just hadn't understood that quite right.
Yep, no, I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I
So-
didn't want to take away from your question.
Well, I guess it had been consulted on by the community quite loud and clear, and I was under the impression that it was down approximately where it says Holiday Park at the top of the
Yeah.
photo.
So,
And-
yeah, but yes, that has been the consultation to date. But as part of the advisory panel's work, we felt that to give it complete due diligence, we needed to have one last look at where the best site would be.
Okay.
And if this came to a designation, will be coming back to council to do that process or not?
I don't know the answer to that because I'm completely au fait with process as yet. But I would say that if we needed to, yes, we would need to do that.
Okay. Is it Councillor Carey?
Thank you. Just to follow on from that question, I had one around the paragraph 15. So it says confirm the designation or to withdraw it. What are the implications of withdrawing it?
What paragraph are you referring to? Sorry.
I
Page
think that's
52.
that's a planning term. A planning term you designate. So you put in a designation, whoever decides it either gets to agree with it or suggest changes, and the party then decides whether it carries on or not, or withdraws.
Right.
I think
For that clarification.
I think that's the process too, commissioners. Yeah, it can't be turned down in the same sense.
Thank you.
Any further questions on that? Just for clarity, the orange line doesn't deal with the library site. It's include, sorry. And I'm intrigued that it's going within the designation of the Silver Stream ORC protection scheme works.
Yes.
Or is that just just an easy graphic?
Possibly. I
Yeah.
can't answer
This is
that.
just
Sorry.
yeah. Okay. Thank you. No other questions? I'll note the update. Any seconder, Councillor O'Malley? Thank you. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Lord.
Well, it's just, I'd just like to state at this point that I have a concern after all the community involvement to the point that we've got to, that we've got a line drawn around the gardens, which we previously ruled out for a number of reasons. Previous committees have decided was not an appropriate site for the pool, and now I know you were saying that it's not just the pool, but it does include the pool if you read the
Absolutely. Yeah.
item 10, and so that would concern me because that could have severe impacts on houses and the noise of a pool running 24/7. I mean, it's quite a lot. So that just worries me, but I don't know if...
I can talk, yeah.
So the advisory panel have had quite a lot to talk about that, and
We're now in debate, so I'm sorry. It's fine.
Yeah. So I just am concerned about that.
Any other discussion? Because I'll cover that off in my right of reply. Okay. The reason I'm happy with this process because I am very aware of the designation process that will be put out and consulted. Generally, when I've done seen designations before, they may have different parts to them. So the Caversham bypass had a part that was designated for footpaths, a part that was cycleways, a part that's roading, and a part that's bridges. It doesn't mean that if you put a designation in for recreational facilities that everything can go anywhere. It will usually have a plan or a scheme to that, and so that I'm comfortable in that process. There'll be a huge amount of consultation with it, and there'll also be a chance for people to be see what those parameters are. But it also ensures that you're planning for the best flood protection work out there, both in the Reed Swale and the flood protection works of the ORC, which I think we also need to be considering when where they place that. And as they get down the design process, they will have better ideas of what suits each site. So that's where I'm comfortable with it, although I've not heard anything more about it than anyone else in the room. So I'll now put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Transport activity report. Mr Saunders, welcome. You have a number of matters to talk to us about this afternoon. Do you wish to talk to this one or just take it as read? Okay, page 55. Any questions of the transport activity report for the quarter ended the 30th of June? Everyone, oh, thank you, Councillor Vandervis.
On page 57, we've got what looks like 4 months of no cumulative actual increase because of asbestos. Why did it take 4 months to get this issue sorted?
So the process to get an agreed work method with WorkSafe was quite a lengthy one, anything dealing with asbestos, so we had to do significant air monitoring and then develop a report and talk through that with our consultant, with our contractor, sorry, who have to undertake the work. So yes, it was longer than perhaps we would have hoped, but it was a robust process, as anything with asbestos is, to ensure that all the risks to the contractors and the public had been dealt with. So they are back out on the network as of a fortnight ago, and we're looking at an additional resource just to catch up on some of the cleaning that we missed over that 3-month period.
So the contract value will stay the same, but some additional resource will be brought in to catch up for what wasn't really the contractor's fault?
That's the new method requires extra staff, requires effectively an extra person around the work site to make sure none of the public get close. So there will be an increased cost, but we're working through that at the moment, just within the bounds of the total contract value.
So there will just be an additional amount to the contractor for this. And are there also going to be extra additional amounts because of the difficulty now of having to catch up?
If we put an additional truck on the network, that will cost us an additional amount as well. So we can get up to a level where we're comfortable with our compliance. Obviously, the priority is to have them clean and working properly, and we'll go through that with Downer, who are providing the service for us under the contract.
Given that the most recent compliance is 97% anyway, which is a lot higher than it has been traditionally, do you think you're going to have to go for the extra truck? Or?
Look, I think we will for a short period, just to tackle some of those areas we know have been problem sites with compliance previously, but we've got a good record of the data of those sites, so we can identify the individual tanks that we know were a problem and target those, so we shouldn't have an extended period with an extra truck.
Thank you very much. On page 59, item 29, we talk about the contract for construction of the connections from the harbour to the railway station and improvements to the existing shared path. Does this include the proposed moving of the main trunk line to facilitate cyclists going under the Wycliffe Street overbridge rather than going around it?
That piece includes the realignment through that section, yes.
And when is it anticipated that this $1.5 million to move the main trunk line, when is it anticipated that this will actually happen and this money be spent?
So we're still going through the negotiation for the land lease from Kiwi Rail, which we have to have in place before we can do any work within their rail corridor. We're also looking at the section from the underbridge down to the existing path where the siding is, to see whether we can reduce the amount of work required on that siding, after previous questions from yourself at these meetings, re-looking at that design to make sure we've got the best design and the best value. So I would expect in the coming quarter for us to have confirmed what that final design is, and then it'll be dependent on our lease negotiation with Kiwi Rail.
So we're spending $1.5 million to move the main trunk line over. Are we also additionally going to be looking at an ongoing lease cost for the strip of land that goes under the Wycliffe Street overbridge?
There is an ongoing cost for all of our where we are using Kiwi Rail land for all of our sites.
Because previously we were able to put the cyclists through what was essentially road reserve. How much extra is this lease cost per year on top of the 1.5 million?
I will have to advise you of that when we've finalised the lease in terms of the area and the cost, but I can report back to you on that.
Thank you.
Councillor Gurry.
Thank you, and congratulations on the work for pedestrian safety, the Barnes Dance and the school cluster in the central city. have 3 questions. The first one is it possible for us to be able to use a standardised name for the Mount Ross Sutton Bridge? Sometimes we're saying Sutton Bridge and sometimes Mount Ross, and it makes it sound like 2 different bridges. It would be great if we could have some uniformity. Second thing is around page 58, item 18, and it talks about the traffic management plan audits undertaken, and I wondered, are you able to tell me, were any of these in relation to the Peninsula Connection project? Where they've got...
I don't believe any of them were related to that. I don't know, but I hadn't had any reports through on that project.
Sure,
so.
Thank you. And item 26, page 59, again, the Peninsula Connection Safety Improvement Project. When will you be announcing news of the next section? There's a lot of interest in the community about... I know that the next one is the Turnbulls Bay add-on, which is really part of what's happening now. When would you have, what would be the timing on announcing the next section?
Look, we would aim for, by the end of October, we should be in a position to make an announcement on that.
And congratulations on the speed with which it's occurred, the work.
Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Richard. Just on the Central City Schools cluster, had a number of people ask me, residents in that area, to be able to articulate what the purpose of that project is, and I've been at a loss to be able to, and it's not your fault, it's just I don't know. And more importantly, how we're measuring success with that. So can you expand particularly on how we know whether it's working or what it's trying to achieve in that sense?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously it's a safety project, really aimed at the students, but also other users. That is a high pedestrian area for people coming into the central city as well. In terms of safety, obviously crash records are one way, although not the only way. There, some of it will be around speed management. So we will be measuring the speeds through those areas. So we'll have before and after just to check on vehicle speeds. The purpose of the majority of the works is to slow vehicles down that are travelling through those areas. So a big measure will be whether the physical changes are actually resulting in behaviour change as far as speed goes. And the other feedback will be from the schools. We get a lot of feedback from the schools just around how they feel the environment is for their students, and we're continuing to seek feedback from them as the various changes are made.
And the red road treatment, are they intended as crossing points or visual cues to traffic to slow down?
So the red ones are identified as safe areas for crossing. So the ones that are there at the moment with the bollards are the trial locations. So all of the majority of our safety work now, we put bollards in first before we go and put concrete curbs in to make sure we get it in the right place, and we can test it with vehicle users and the ORC for their buses, and then we go back after the fact and put the concrete curbs in. So that work's coming up, and that will then define them as an area that's identified for safer crossing because it has better visibility.
Safer crossing, but no rebalancing of the priority of road use?
No, not formal pedestrian crossings, but safer, again, that comes under the informal crossing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one. I was delighted to read about your monitoring. I think you said in here somewhere 4 cameras for monitoring behaviour change. And understanding, do we use that for pedestrians and how anything's changed in the barn stance, with the barn stances, which I think are encouraging people to walk more in the CBD, but it just may be my view. Do we know if there's been an increase in pedestrian traffic because of things like that?
We don't have any data on the pedestrian numbers. It is a gap in our data collection that Nick and his team are currently looking at. Is how to get some measurements around the number of pedestrians using streets within the central city. Mm-hmm. So we don't have anything specifically. The cameras are used normally just to view the behaviours and do vehicle counts at intersections, but they can also count pedestrians and cyclists. We just haven't used them for that purpose through the central city.
Okay, just understanding with the bus hub then, being rolled out, are we going to actually so we don't have any baseline information to understand the effect of how that may change people's behaviour? Because we've got no information beforehand? Or?
So not pedestrians, no baseline data for numbers of pedestrians. We do have data for vehicles and travel times. We have got some cycling data, but the gap in our data at the moment is pedestrians. So we are looking at how to fill that with either temporary counts or a permanent counter. Or
yeah. Okay, that's frustrating. Councillor Vandervis.
Getting back to the Wycliffe Street overbridge, do you have any cycling data projected for the number of cyclists that you anticipate going to be going under this very expensive diversion?
There will be, not on me, but I can certainly get you that. There would have been some forecasting of those numbers based on existing State Highway out shared path data and ANZAC.
So you'll have that stuff, but it's never been in any of our agendas?
No, I can send that.
Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, and sorry, Richard, but just again on the Central City Schools thing, in terms of data gathering, are we doing anything to capture how much safer or not pedestrians or students or whatever that we're doing this work for feel? Because I mean, perceptions of safety, and I've got an ongoing question mark around courtesy crossings in general, but you know, there may be no crashes and speed may adjust, but people may not feel any safer using those roads as pedestrians. So how are we capturing that?
So that's the feedback through the schools part of it, which is more of an anecdotal. So we are going to the schools. There's been surveys done with the schools on what sort of changes, and we can go back and do a survey based on the changes. Do you feel safer through the environment? Because a lot of it is around that as opposed to hard measurements. So they are just continued feedback that we need to seek from the school as we roll out various changes.
Thank you. And Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks, Richard. It's around the minor improvement projects and just actually asking in terms of any areas that might also be included in the future, and I'm thinking of King Edward Street and mostly around Cargill's Corner. That's an area that has a fairly high pedestrian and traffic interface, and I don't know if you've been made aware of a video of relatively difficult use for wheelchair access on that particular intersection. Is there any indication that we might be working down in that area as well to get better understanding of need and what capital works we might be doing there?
Yes, so the safety team are looking at that one at the moment. That came up when we first announced the change to Barnstance intersection, the city too. A lot of requests to roll that out down there, but the team are they're looking at what impact that will have on traffic flows and other things in those areas. But that whatever changes made there, whether it be a Barnstance or an alternative, will make sure it addresses some of those other safety issues we know we've got.
Okay, another question from Councillor Vandervis.
The Friat Street cycleway painting lanes. The Australian consultant in our agenda paper suggested that these were going to be 3.2 metres wide and that truck parking was only going to be 2.5 metres wide. I suggested at the time that perhaps these figures had been got completely back to front because you can't park a 2.5 metre wide truck in a 2.5 metre wide slot. Looking down Friat Street recently, there seem to be new, I'm not sure how new they are, cycleways that have been painted that are significantly less than 3.2 metres. Is it still anticipated that you're going to increase them to 3.2 as per the consultants, or are the lines that are painted in Friat Street now, are they the final solution? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'll happily move that report be noted. Thank you, Richard. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Any discussion? Councillor Vandervis.
I've raised my dissatisfaction with the original agenda that accounted for most of the $7 million spending that was going to include the bridge over the Leith, the Friat Street changes, and the particularly, I think, bizarre suggestion of moving the main trunk line over. to allow cyclists to go under the Wycliffe Street overbridge when we had already, a few years previously, provided them a route round it. I was very unhappy that that particular agenda, which the rest of the council happily voted for, didn't specify the costs of many things, didn't specify the fact that moving the main trunk line over was going to cost $1.5 million. And that in fact it was only due to my questioning that we found this out, and it hasn't appeared in any other agenda that I've seen since. I'm now extra disappointed to discover that in addition to this incredible sum for taking a kink out of a cycleway of $1.5 million, it now appears that we're going to have an ongoing lease cost from the rail reserve, again an unspecified amount, again not anything that has been figured in any of the agendas that I have read, and that these costs have not been included in what was brought to council to vote on in the first place. Now, I'm not sure whether it may have changed the councillors' vote if they had known how much these things were actually going to cost or what they were going to get for their money. But I'm very dissatisfied that we have been put in a position where we continue to learn that things are going to become more expensive, that we don't know or haven't been told how many cyclists are actually going to use this facility, and that the ratepayers are basically in a situation where, having seen a lot of other extraordinarily dysfunctional design in cycleways, and I'm thinking particularly of what used to be a 4-lane road between the BP station at Andersons Bay and the foreshore, 800 metres of which is now, after the third attempt, cost ratepayers $1.2 million, and which, if you drive up it, going from north to south, you will see some very expensive curb and channel and drainage on what is, in many places, on the high side of the street, so that, quite frankly, it'll never get used. The confidence that I hope to have after a lot of the early mistakes in cycleway design hasn't been improved by discovering more and more costs and having more and more negative feedback from users of cycleways that has just continued to come, more recently from the one-way street system. Now, I recognise that the one-way street system design hasn't been ours, and I recognise also that NZTA probably have got quite a bit of adjustment to do with that cycleway. But having said that, given the long history of the problems that we've had with cycleways and the current problems happening on the one-way street system, which, quite frankly, a lot of the public also continue to blame us for, rightly or wrongly, I would like to hope that in future, any of this kind of infrastructural spending is properly anticipated in terms of its usage, properly highlighted in terms of what the actual bits of it are going to cost, rather than just an agenda paper saying, oh, it's going to be another $7 million for more cycleway stuff. And also to include things like what we've just learned today, that there are ongoing lease costs involved, for instance, in this case, with having a cycleway on the rail reserve. We can't change what's happened in the past, but given that we've been very slow, in my opinion, about learning from early mistakes, I would hope that we simply don't have any more of these surprises coming out of the woodwork, and that in fact the whole cycleway push to spend enormous amounts of money, running to hundreds of millions of dollars now, becomes more transparent, and that we are given much more information about who's actually using them, how many cyclists are projected to use them in the future, and what sort of cost benefit there is in spending these enormous amounts of money. I haven't seen cost benefit yet, and I don't want to vote for any further cycleway spending unless we see really solid cost benefit for what is proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Vandris. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to reflect on a very good news story within this report, and that is around the Peninsula Connection, which I touched on in my questions. It's a very good news story because it was very long awaited by the community. I was one of the community that lobbied for many years, along with colleagues, for this project to continue and be completed. And this particular section that's been done has progressed particularly well. It's progressed quickly but efficiently. The contractors have done an excellent job of being responsive to the community. Our staff have done an excellent job in this regard, and I have noted that the tolerance of the community and the patience of the community has been exceptional, and I want to acknowledge that. It requires people in the area to leave a little earlier for work, an extra few minutes, because there are quite a number of roadworks along the way. But because the project is rolling out in a very visible way, we can see, those folk who live on the peninsula, we can see that the benefit is going to be worth the pain, in other words, the inconvenience. It's probably one of the most dangerous times at the moment. I've always said that the time in between where we have some widened sections and some narrower sections is a dangerous time. We have a lot of very big trucks rolling through there, but I think that all users are very aware of that. NZTA, of course, their subsidy decreases over time, so the sooner we can complete the project, the better. But I just wanted to take this moment to congratulate staff and contractors on a job that is being very well done, and we're at the footpath and paving section now, and it's very good news.
Thank you. Any other comments before? I'll just say in right of reply, since I moved the motion, that I am surprised that people aren't aware of the lease arrangements, which is a normal everyday business, I think. What I understand and short of is that this cycleway that has been suggested has been and properly done, has been done to budget, and is providing an access way for cyclists, walkers, users of with pushchairs, runners, and a whole wide range of people, not just cyclists, which it seems to be continually put down as when it's a shared path safety project. It also is delivering I think it was over 70-metre reduction in distance for people to travel in a much more direct route, so therefore will encourage people to use it even more, and I think some people forget those issues. So with that, I will also thank you for all the other matters in the report and put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. The next matter is 11, naming of the new private way off Bruce Street, Mosgiel, page 62. Moved and seconded. Mayor and Deputy Mayor. Did anyone have any questions of... I was going to leave that actually to the previous chair of the Maranatha Trust to move, who's sitting around the table with us, if he had wanted to. Anyway, no questions, no debate. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Naming of the new private way off Marjorie Lane, Mosgiel, page 66. Moved and seconded. Mayor and Deputy Mayor. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. 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 Against? Carried. Thank you. Page 70, the railway station trial. Is it meant to be trial or trail? Trial. Would you like to speak to this report?
Look, this report has taken some time to come. We did this trial earlier in the year, so apologies, it has been a bit of a gap between then and now, but we felt it was important to at least get that feedback in front of the council while people could still remember what we had done. So this is just outlining that and obviously what the next steps are.
I'm prepared to take questions. Any questions, Councillor Gary, then O'Malley?
I've got two questions. Thank you for the report. The first thing is around the mobility impaired and elderly people. And there are, of course, a lot of cruise ship passengers that do have disability issues. I noted the diagram. Is that a key point, a priority point, as you go into the next trial?
Yes, it was. We did get feedback on access for mobility users, so that's something that during the next trial, as we work towards what the design of that trial will be, just trying to address some of those concerns raised.
Thank you. And my second question is around the Art Society, and I've certainly had people approach me who have this issue of dropping off and picking up artwork. Probably the dropping off is the key. They hope they're going to sell it, so they might not have as many to pick up. But sometimes they have 3 artworks. They're often awkward, large, heavy. And I wonder if there is going to be consideration possibly to trialling parking, the parking that you've got at the north and south ends, whether that could be designated at those appointed times, because you know when the pick-up and drop-off times are. They're very specific times before an exhibition and afterwards. Is it possible to include that in the next trial to see if we can find some compromise for these folk?
Yes, it will be possible to have a look at what options we've got, and working with our property department too, who manage the railway station, with the tenants, and just making sure we are aware of what their needs are and how we may be able to accommodate them. But certainly that Art Society issue, they were great during the trial. They got a lot of feedback off their own bat and made sure that was provided to us. So we'll make sure we work with them on the second trial.
Thank you very much, and it was great having it as a specific section. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
It's a good report. My question is a more generic one around trialling in general. What was the level of traffic management plan that was required for this trialling?
So it was I'm just trying to remember back, a standard traffic management plan was submitted to council. It actually gets submitted to the transport group, but from a provider. And that gets assessed to ensure that it meets the various standards within the code of practice, and then is rolled out by whichever contractor we have. So it's a reasonably straightforward process, provided you get the right people involved who are aware of the different requirements of that traffic management code of practice.
I'm thinking as we are looking at design as we go forward with other parts of the city and the effects on traffic movement. Was this is a fairly straightforward spot right in front of the railway station. Is that plan more complex if you went out and said, let's see what happens if we shut off a piece of Lower Stewart Street, or let's see what happens if we shut off a piece of George Street?
This would be far simpler than closing off a section of public road that would be much busier. We could still do that through temporary traffic management, but there would be more things to work through, but it could certainly be done. This would be at the more straightforward end, just because of the way the layout of it.
But would you say that do you get information that's worthy, though, to help you with future planning, like you're going to obviously trial this again? Is it worth the investment to get that information? Because is there any other way do you think you'd be able to get it other than actually closing a place off and seeing what happens?
Oh, trials are great. I fully support the use of trials, just to understand. The difficulty is they're only a snapshot depending on what activities are around, but as long as you're aware of that when you're undertaking the trial, then you can put that into your assessment. But they are a great way of understanding how the community responds to various scenarios. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Van der Vis.
On page 81, sorry, just a general question. Who actually wrote this feedback report?
Susan Lilly's name on it.
Susan Lilly, Transport Planner.
Okay. On page 81, it says that there were 300 positive reactions. Doesn't say how many negative reactions there were. Why is that? How many negative reactions were there?
So I'm not a massive social media user, but I think the positive, you can't have a negative reaction on social media. There's only there were comments, and we've picked up those comments in the general feedback, but until they introduce a thumbs down thing, we won't get a number.
All right. So obviously this creates an issue for feedback straight away, but going to the next line, there were a few comments that showed concern. How many is a few?
I'd have to go and get the full breakdown of the social media feedback.
All right,
Councillor.
and then again later on, a few tour operators. Why is it that we have these very vague terms for anything that might be negative, but we have 300 positive reactions? And it goes right through this report, right down the bottom. There was showed that there was wide concern. Again, if you're going to mention numbers, surely you should be mentioning the positive as well as the negative ones.
Yep.
Right, and my next question was, who was it that decided that you were going to, in the, we're going to page 75 here, when we're talking about 172 people submitted feedback. Who was it that decided that 87% of this feedback would be asking pedestrians outside the railway station?
Who was it that decided that we would ask pedestrians?
Why is it that you get feedback just from pedestrians outside the railway station? Surely by having 80% of your feedback coming from pedestrians, you're bound to get people in favour of pedestrians, wouldn't you think?
Look, the project is around making the area safer, so everyone had the opportunity to feedback. It was widely advertised on media and social media, and drivers could have chosen to feedback. The reason we specifically went down and asked questions of pedestrians and users in front of the railway station forecourt is we wanted to get that feedback from the people down there to tell us whether what we had done had achieved the outcomes we were aiming for, which was around safety and amenity, so that they're a specific group we're interested in. Others who are concerned about it and had feedback certainly had the chance to provide that feedback, and a good number did.
Well, when you say a good number, again, that number isn't specified here. What it says is 172 people submitted, 21 responded via the online admission form, and all the others were pedestrians outside the railway station. I could have told you, just knowing that you would have had a vast positive response for pedestrian only in the area without actually having to do the survey.
Sorry, can I just...
Because of the way you've picked who you're going to ask.
Sorry, can I just get some clarity on your question? And
why is it?
Sorry, can I just ask a question of? So when you did the pedestrians, the road was closed. So you were expecting to get people who wanted to get there by vehicles, but also people who were walking there. In that trial,
would have been a combination. So it was just the users of the space. So it was some that had driven there and others that had walked or cycled.
But they couldn't drive into the site.
Correct.
Yeah, because you expected to pick up on pedestrians and those who otherwise had driven there. Okay, so that I was just wondering, because I don't think it was just looking at pedestrians. It was.
Well, that's what it says here.
But they were pedestrians because they couldn't drive there because it was closed.
Well, ultimately, they would have got a car or public transport to get anywhere near the area from the suburbs.
Well,
this goes without saying.
We know that they were pedestrians at that point when they were interviewed.
And
so
they are 80% of the people producing the so-called very positive response and feedback for a result which I believe, if you look at the way it's been structured, was inevitably going to favour massively pedestrians. If you ask only pedestrians and you don't ask the car drivers around the place, and it says here that it was basically just pedestrians that were asked, then you're going to get that kind of result.
If I get out of my car to go over a pedestrian area because I cannot drive there, does that make me a car driver or a pedestrian? And I think the issue here is that you're getting everyone, whether they're a car driver wanting to get to that point or a pedestrian, but they're seen as a pedestrian at that point. I think that's what the difference is in the numbers is.
With respect, I believe that if you're a car driver that can't drive there, then you're unlikely to have been caught by the 87% that were there.
Okay. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question. The second trial is in spring, which is imminent. Do we know when? And I'm just nervous about the current roadworks in the area and how useful that trial might be.
Yeah, we're looking at a few things around roadworks, what other activities are on in the city, and just trying to select a weekend that will give us a good understanding of how that operates. There's a number of things we'll look at. It's likely to be spring. should be 3 months, so it's likely to be towards the end of that, maybe later in October that we're looking at.
Okay. And it is related in that it's a question of staff capacity in terms of designing these trials, because someone has to do that. And we also have budget for trials of greater pedestrianisation in the Lower Octagon and Stewart Street over this coming summer. That's still on track to happen? And when can we expect to see a program of work around that?
I can't answer that at the moment. It's being talked about in terms of the wider Central City project and picking up that the trials, but there is no program in place at the moment, so I'd have to come back on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to, before asking my question, congratulate Mr Saunders on the success of a trial, and I think the follow-up will be equally welcomed by the wider community, including people who, once they climb out of their cars, become pedestrians, and feel free to make a comment. But I'm aware of an earlier trial that doesn't seem to have yielded as much fruit in respect of the Stafford Street, Mance Street, Princess Street intersection, that problematic corner above the Exchange, where a trial some time ago of a traffic island in that area, roundabout, was undertaken, and I wondered if there was any likelihood of progressing with such simple changes that would improve that issue, including the examination of movement in or out of Stafford Street, which I understand is partly under discussion.
Yeah, so that trial, one of the challenges with the roundabout in that location is the safety of pedestrians, which we have a large number of, and the traffic lights do allow them to cross far safer than they would if it was a roundabout. So that was one of the bits of feedback from the trial. The team are still looking at that site. It is still an active site. There was a meeting with some of the landowners not too long ago just to discuss what options there may be with some development going on in Stafford Street. So in terms of how that intersection operates and trying to balance the vehicle needs there, because it is a high traffic count at that intersection, along with the pedestrians, of which there are also large numbers, they are starting to look at how a five-way intersection could be best managed, and whether that is changes to the existing layout will be born out of the further development work.
Would certainly be development or change improvement would be welcomed by everyone. Yep. What's the time frame on such consideration?
I'd have to go and check with our safety team as to what stage they're at and come back.
A question from me, Richard. If you wouldn't mind turning to page 79 of the report, which is attachment A, the final graph before the feedback comments. I just want to check I'm reading this correctly. So of the people that did the survey, if you add the people who usually typically visited the railway precinct by driving or by parking and stay, that would be 25%, the 8 plus the 17. So the figures did at least represent some people who would normally drive there.
Correct.
And who wouldn't otherwise potentially be considered as pedestrians.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll happily note the report. Sorry, there's noting, and there's 3 different notes. The committee notes the summary of the feedback, notes the staff are preparing a second trial, and notes the staff will report back with a proposal and process for formal consultation following their second trial closure. I'll happily move. Seconded, Councillor O'Malley. Any discussion? Councillor Vanvus.
If in future we are to do feedback surveys, I believe that these surveys need to be run along accepted survey lines. That is to say, that they don't rely heavily on self-selected individuals, that we don't narrow the scope to the extent as we have here, where 87% of the surveyed respondents are pedestrians in front of the railway station. And I also think that we need to be very careful about how we phrase the questions on social media, given that you can only get likes on social media, as has been borne out here. What this survey does, I believe, is asks a very skewed set of questions to an even more skewed set of respondents, and then minimises the responses from bus and taxi operators, from people who would normally use those car parks, and they were extremely well used car parks, and not just for ordinary people using the car parks to access the railway station, but also particularly the disabled car parks and visitors. They too have been, I believe, severely minimised in this report, as have the comments and members of the Otago Art Society, who are a major user of the railway station. So if you just gloss through this and look at some of the graphs and realise that there's, yes, a lot of happiness about pedestrians in the area, that may give you some comfort, but I believe that the comfort is misplaced. If you look at all the other users of the railway station, and in particular the number of tourists that would want to use the area, the fact that the temporary bus requirements now extend to the parking areas right round the front of the farmers market, again, very sought after and actually hard fought for car parks, which we thought we were going to lose to a cycleway until we kicked up about it. Now we realise we've lost them to the temporary parking for the buses and whatever that can no longer use the railway station. This particular load of feedback, to me, has not adequately looked at the wide range of users and has not adequately represented what the real issues are going to be when this change becomes permanent. I accept that there have been real, if not yet, realised safety concerns, mixing cars and people on the front skirt of the railway station. But as has been confirmed earlier, there have not been any accidents or incidents in that regard, even though the potential was there. I think the potential is always there. I believe that this survey hasn't actually helped us see what is going on. I think it's actually done quite the opposite. And I'm hoping that in future that feedback will be not self-selecting in terms of who's interviewed, and that we will get a better standard of information on which to make decisions.
Councillor O'Malley.
I quite welcomed this trial that was done, and I guess my only feedback is that if we're going to go forward to exploring the ideas of pedestrianisation or shared spaces and other such things, I think we'd get better information the longer the trials were. So maybe if we were seeing short-term trials to figure out whether or not something catastrophic is going to occur, and then go to a slightly longer trial to get a sense of really what's going to happen, and then actually trial what we actually anticipate we plan on doing. And in that way we get a full understanding of what we're facing, and I assume in that bigger trial that I envisage, we would be asking people like business owners in the area, what's your business like before we started the trial, what's happened during the trial, and what do you think? And then we would be maybe have a more robust questionnaire set. But I think that when you're first trying something out for the first time, you're not going to know necessarily all the questions you're going to want to ask or answer. And as far as I'm concerned, it was a good first blush at seeing what this would look like, and I congratulate you on your trial and look forward to the next one.
Put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
No. Recorded, please.
Thank you. Now moving on to item 14, the LED street light renewal project. Are you just happy to take questions, or do you want to talk to the report? Might be helpful to cover off the general questions about the 2,200 Kelvin.
Yeah, certainly. So obviously the report is, as had been requested and discussed previously, and an update and a chance for council to review the decision that was made last year to roll out a 3,000 Kelvin program subject to NZTA approval, which we have got through the business case. Since, or relatively recently, the Mackenzie have had low-level or lower Kelvin lights approved as part of their renewal. And that is a process they went through negotiating with NZTA based on their current Dark Sky Association status. So it does show that it was possible in their instance, I guess, and the process with NZTA, you will never get a yes or no, concrete yes or no from them until you've been through a full business case. So we can't say absolutely either way. What we can base our information and recommendations on, and the reason this is a noting report is simply because we haven't changed our recommendations from last year's report. They stand as they were then, and the update to the information is contained in there. We're still comfortable that the 3,000 provides, with the central management system, provides the best balance between the outcomes we're seeking around safety and energy efficiency and capital costs, and the other outcomes that there are very highly engaged, and we do get a lot of information and good information from the group who are supporting a amber light or a lower Kelvin light for the Dark Sky Association side of things. So that's where we've got to. I guess I see the Mackenzie situation as very different to ours, and I'm not, I guess again, without any real concrete feedback from NZTA, based on what we do know, I don't believe that is an outcome that we could land on. We could land with, and I still think we get an optimum outcome with our 3,000s in our central management system, which allows us to dim and control that as we see fit as a city, and achieve much lower light levels for the majority of the night anyway. So happy to take questions.
Thank you. First ones are from Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Richard. At various points, we discussed having kind of a standard approach, whether it's 3,000, if we could get away with it, or 4,000, but look at lower Kelvin bulbs in particular, particularly sensitive, particularly ecologically sensitive areas. That hasn't been pursued at this point?
So we haven't done any specific work on that, but that option still remains as per the 2017 report, where we talked about a staged rollout, and the stage one is the majority of the city, and stage two would be the areas that may fall into that category that would warrant further investigation. And given the change in technology, even in the last year, between by the time we get through the stage one of the rollout, which will be a lot of the larger residential areas, we will have a good idea about what alternatives are available that may be suitable in those other areas. So it is definitely something that we will keep working on as we progress with whoever the selected contractors are.
Yeah. I'm going to take your point. When we started, this 3,000 seemed fanciful, and now all of a sudden 2,200 is apparently fundable. So it's difficult to make these sorts of decisions. What's the life expectancy of the bulbs, as in this is a once in a X year opportunity to do whatever we're doing?
20 years.
20, yeah, right. So it is a significant time period.
Yes, yeah.
Does the Dark Skies Advisory Panel still function? Our assembled stakeholder engagement group on these particular issues? I'm not sure that it's been meeting regularly. Okay. And so, and it's a level of detail I wouldn't necessarily ask, but it's perhaps relevant here. And it came up in the transport report where it said the RFP for this has already gone out. So the scope of that is what kind of broad geographical area?
So the scope of that is the whole rollout. So that is the works, the whole city, the entire rollout. But within that there is we've gone out with a requirements based on the 2017 report with the ability to change that as part of the assessment of it. So there is nothing in there that would prevent us rolling out a different type of light within those stage 2 areas or the other areas that are identified.
Okay, and so that's so there are clear points at which we can choose to change direction based on the information that we have at that point.
Yes, within reason. We wouldn't want to be changing direction too often or have too many different options within the city. It would become difficult to manage, but certainly once a contract and design team is on board, we would have a core lamp that has been assessed or light that's been assessed and selected based on a number of criteria. But there would then be the ability to work with that team to identify a suitable light for a different area of the city identified as ecologically sensitive or that would be the key reason, and provided that was deemed a suitable alternative and could meet the other requirements as far as plugging into the central management system and other things, there'd be no reason we couldn't do that.
And that will be clear to whoever the tender is.
Yes.
And just finally, I mean, in the report it talks about higher and lower relative operational costs or capital costs, but without any real order of magnitude. Is it possible to get that?
We haven't done an assessment in any detail, so we haven't drilled it in detail. We did request that information from strategic lighting partners who are providing input. So and this is a rough order of costs for capital, it's around 15%, the difference between the lower Kelvin, which is less than it was when we wrote the report a year ago, which is another indication of what's happening in the market. The operating costs are around 20%, and that's just the lower the Kelvin, the greater the electricity uses, which is the balance that is weighed up.
And is one of the factors we're considering on an energy project of this scale, when it is one of the big energy plan projects, the carbon footprint of whatever our eventual plan or staged plan looks like in terms of the energy implications of.
So we're certainly considering the energy use. So the 3,000 is a compromise on energy savings. 4,000 would have achieved greater energy savings than 3,000, but again, balanced with the other needs of the city or desires and objectives of the city, we felt 3,000 was still appropriate. It still achieves significant energy savings.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary?
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins has covered some of my question, but just to go into another point on that, I was interested in how flexible we could be, and I understand we've got to put a line in the sand at some point. But, and you may not be able to speak for them, but how agile is NZTA in terms of keeping up with the technology, in terms of the subsidy and what they're prepared to give a subsidy for? I mean, clearly they were prepared to do that in the case of Mackenzie, and I understand they have the dark sky designation. We have an aspiration towards that in some regards. How agile would you say NZTA were in adapting to that changing technology?
Oh, look, I can't speak for NZTA. It has taken a significant amount of time for them to start approving 3,000 Kelvin lights. So, we're happy we got a full business case approved with a central management system at 3,000 because that was a change. I can't say how much work it may take. What I would say in response to one comment in there is 3,000 still meets the requirements of the International Dark Sky, and particularly with the central management system, which effectively means we can run the 3,000 at 75%, and then it becomes significantly lower than a 3,000 lamp anyway. So it gives us the ability to deliver.
So that segues very nicely into my next question, which is around the wider community's perception, I would say there's probably some members of the wider community who don't get this yet, who don't understand that. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that central management system and the dimming and so forth, and the benefits of that? Because I think that's really key to this and understanding the compromise in the 3,000.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I suppose the key thing around the central management system is the flexibility it gives us. So had we not gone with that, we would have been selecting dimming profiles probably at a, not at an optimum level, because we wouldn't want to have to go back to each bulb again and again and again to adjust it. So it will give us a greater amount of flexibility to make sure we can achieve the greatest energy efficiency, but also where we have specific issues around whether it's communities or sites wanting different levels of light for whatever reason, and the observatory would be a good example, and they have contacted us. We can select that as an area and run a different profile for them, whether it's around specific events or all the time.
So if there was an aurora, for example, you'd be able to dim the lights. If the Midwinter Carnival needed the lights dimmed, that's possible too?
Yeah, so all of that's possible. If there were events at the stadium, we can turn them up. If there were, all of those things become a lot easier for us to manage. But I guess the ultimate one is around the energy savings, and we can really maximise those by turning the system down as much as practically possible.
How well understood do you think that this is not costing council entirely? It's an 85% subsidy by NZTA. Do you think that's widely understood in the community?
Look, we've covered it off in the media releases we've done around the project. I couldn't say how well understood.
And my final question is around the interest in the tender. Has there been quite a lot of interest at this point, or is it early days?
Yeah, it's a significant project as far as volume goes for the companies that are involved in these sort of projects, so there's been a lot of interest.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the work towards this.
Councillor Vandewis.
When you mentioned a larger residential area that's going to be rolled out first, what is that larger residential area?
Oh, sorry, by that stage one, sorry, Councillor, just meant the areas identified in stage 2 were more the coast or the peninsula, the north coast and the south coast, the balance of the city, so all of the inner city and the residential suburbs are all in stage 1. We haven't determined which area would be first yet. That'll be subject to the contractor being appointed. Okay, and the central management system, is it a generic add-on so that you could use these sensors on any kind of light, or do they have to be linked to the supplier's light as well? Have they locked us into using a particular light type? No, that's all part of the tender process. They will have to put the package forward with the central management system meeting specific requirements that we've set, and to show us how that will connect to the light. Or lights. So all of that is set out in the tender process to make sure that both the central management system and the lights meet the requirements we've set, and we don't have to compromise on either. Right, but my question was, if we want to go to a different manufacturer or even a different type of light later, will the same sensors that control the lights be able to be used on other types of lights? Yeah, so all of the lights, or it would be all of the ones we have seen to date, have a plug within the top of them where the sensor sits. So if we change lights, we can still use the same sensors and they can connect to the same management system. And that would be a requirement we would put out if we ever did want to change lights anyway. But the industry is fairly consistent in the way it develops these and has the sockets in that allow the sensors to be plugged in and makes them a little bit more flexible. And have those connectors, those sockets, been standardised amongst a large number of manufacturers? Yes. Brilliant. Yep. Great. Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know how many others have received some correspondence in the last day or so from the silent majority, if that's not a contradiction in terms, expressing a concern at the loss of the beautiful twinkling lights that are part of our nightscape. So I just wanted to clarify that matter, because I think not everyone has seen, obviously, the photo in the papers that show the Lynn Street example, and how clear it makes it that the spill is hugely reduced and so on. But because of the shielding of the new luminaires, it's incontrovertible, isn't it, that unless you're below them, there will be a very massively reduced amount of light spill visible from anywhere else in the city.
That's correct. There'll be a significant reduction in light spill, and we'll have the data to tell us exactly what that reduction's been, so that's part of this process to demonstrate that.
Thank you.
Your Worship.
Madam Chair. Mr Saunders, I was interested in your comment that the 3,000 kV lights could be dimmed to 75%. So I'm interested in a couple of things. What would the illumination levels be like compared with 2,200 kV between those two? And what would the colour rendition comparison be like? And the third question is, do you think that 2,200 kV lights across the whole city, given that we haven't tested them, and we did test the 3,000 and 4,000 ones, would they provide sufficient or safe illumination on a permanent basis, in your view?
I'll try and answer the last one first. I guess one of the things we look to address whether or not something's safe is whether it's been approved by NZTA. So that is one of the key things that they take on board is safety, and do the specifications of the light meet what they would consider to be safe levels, and they have obviously moved now to say yes, we think 3,000 has got to a point where the quality is okay, and on balance with other matters we're happy to approve that. So that is a signal to us that we still meet those requirements around safety, but we can go some way towards meeting the expectations of the dark sky groups or supporters, and put in a light that's not a 4,000, which clearly is a very different type of light. The colour rendition of the 2.2, you want to try and...
I understand the colour rendition of the 2.2 is very similar to the high pressure sodium we have right now, so everything would kind of look orange. So yeah, what you've got right now would be really similar. But just going back to, if we were to put in a lower Kelvin light, we'd be running them at a higher wattage and get the same level of light on the ground. So it would just take more energy, but would still have the same level of light. Yeah.
And what about the colour rendition comparison between a 2,200 and a 75% 3,000?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
So one way to look at it, and we did check this with again with strategic lighting partners, was if the level of blue light is the concern. If we ran a 3,000 Kelvin, it would have X blue light in it, and that's what through our tender process we're trying to limit that by selecting one of the criteria is the amount of blue light. If we were running it at 50%, say, we would have 50% of the amount of blue light that was put out at that light running at 100% of its 3,000 Kelvin. So we do have the ability to control the amount of blue light spill as well, just by minimising the level we're running those lights at.
But you'd only have 50% of the other light as well, wouldn't you?
Correct.
In general terms, you'd only have 50% of the illumination.
Yes. Yeah. Whether, and again, we're probably getting into areas that none of us would be qualified to talk about, but whether a 2,200 with the orange light, so you wouldn't have the safety aspects you get from the whiter light with crisper and better vision, whether you could turn that down to the same level you could a 3,000, so you may not be able to run a lower Kelvin at as low a percentage to achieve those minimum light levels or the safety outcomes you're after. So it becomes there's a science behind it that, yeah, again, I guess we'll know more about once we have done the testing on the lights that come through as part of the tender process.
So I guess, and just finally, I guess what I was picking up on is the ability to reduce the output of the 3,000s, and whether that would achieve the same aims or close to the same aims as using the 2,200s anyway.
It would go, my opinion is it would go some way too. We would have a much lower level of light right across the city. It won't address the colour. That won't change. It would just be a lower level of the 3,000 Kelvin light, but it wouldn't change it to more of an orange light.
Councillor O'Malley.
I'm just sort of going to follow up everybody else's questions on the same lines, and then I'll probably have to talk the science part of it, the other bit, because you have to ask questions at this point. Kelvin, as you would think have told everybody, is basically a black body light emitted number. If you heat it up to that temperature, it's kind of light it would give out. It doesn't tell you, let's say right now this is about 50 lux units coming out of these lights. It doesn't tell you how bright the light is, it just tells you the colour of it. Why is it that we don't get both the colour and the brightness when they're doing the specs of these lights? Do you know why?
Yeah, we do, absolutely. So we'll be putting in particular wattage of lights according to the...
Could we get it in lux rather than wattage? Would be better. I mean, because watt's only power consumption, whereas lux is illumination.
So we rely on our technical experts for that.
Yeah, so I think, Councillor, the lux levels in terms of the lux levels on the ground, what we've said is through this process we will achieve what is currently there, and part of the process that we've gone through is to have a full assessment of the current network to see what sort of what lux or light level is on the ground, so it can be tested against the replacement. So when they put forward a proposal, they'll need to be confident that whatever they're putting forward as a 3000 can meet that lux level, and that'll just the amount or the wattage level of that light will then achieve the lux level, because it will need a certain amount of power to reach that
It
level.
will need a certain amount of power, but if it's efficient, in other words, an incandescent 100-watt bulb and an LED at 7 watts puts out the same lux. So unless you know the efficiency of the bulb, the lux is the only thing that you actually physiologically can predict. Because I think there's a misconception out here, and that is that the Kelvin number is somewhat linked to the brightness of the light, which I think is causing confusion. Would you agree that some people seem to be speaking as if there is this confusion between the Kelvin number and the actual brightness?
That's right.
Right, and then the other part is, in the end, the technology keeps getting better and better and better. It's not like computers that just get faster the year before. Eventually, the technology gets aligned to our eyes, and then at that point, there's no real need for improvement. And which is why I think the people are looking for the 2200s, because it gets down to the orange and the green and the red end of the spectrum, which our cones need for seeing colour. And they need a certain amount of light, lux, in order to be able to work. So it's a combination of wavelength and light emission that gives you the colour vision, which I think is what NZTA was concerned about. It is the ability to pick up colour, isn't it, with NZTA for night vision?
Colour rendition is...
Colour rendition,
yeah. They see that as important for road safety.
Right.
Yeah,
and if we had been having this discussion 2 years ago, we would have been sticking firmly to 4000s, because that's what the NZTA standard was back then. So are we seeing that as the technology evolves and gets nearer to in line with the physiology of our eyes, that the NZTA number is also moving along with technological advancement? So while it does permit us, while we're saying that we are operating inside the permittable NZTA numbers, it doesn't mean that NZTA's numbers is actually a reflection of the optimal physiological interaction between lights and our eyes. It's just, that's what NZTA now, between the cost of a luminaire, a unit, and what you can get out of it, is they say this number or above.
Yeah, look, based on the evidence they've got, that's where they've set their current levels, and that's what we're working to. Whether or not or how fast the work's done to change that, we don't know.
Okay, but it could conceivably also change in the future.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thanks.
From me, when you're talking about the environment and the areas you might put it, and the one that I'm thinking is the town belt, or around the observatory, or even Lovelock Avenue, those sort of ones, are those ones when you roll it out in the CBD or the central residential area that you've talked about, that you'd consider doing a different light?
Yeah, we can consider any or all areas, and the conversation is whether we can achieve the outcomes they're seeking by a dimming profile within the 3000s, or whether we need a different type of light, because that will be understood better as we work through the project. But we can pick up those areas through the process.
And just for the comfort for anyone who's watching this on TV, from that group, for that Dark Skies group, that you'll be working, doing mini trials as you have leading up to this project, as you roll it out at a bigger, higher level.
That's right. So part of the tender process is to trial any potential suppliers' lights.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wish to move this, note this report? Thank you, Councillor Hall and Councillor Gary. Do you want to speak to that? Any discussion? Councillor O'Malley?
I just really want to comment that the technology is moving, and I understand that once, and the energy savings that we're facing are enormous, so any more postponing would be an enormous cost over here in energy. But the technology probably will come out with a better product in the next 5 to 10 years' time. And I'm just hoping that as we go forward, we can figure out how to balance those two quite differing priorities. I also want to note that the Dark Skies group have actually also come in behind this and said that they think the council's coming to a good place right now. And I do acknowledge and congratulate you on your communication with all groups as we're going forward with this, as we're trying to balance this relatively difficult balance between energy savings and optimal outcomes. Thanks.
Councillor Gary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment on the work that's done to sort of readjust to our request for the 3,000. And I found it really helpful listening to my colleague, our colleague Councillor O'Malley, around the science. I think we all probably are much better informed as we've gone through the workshops and have looked at the reports around a topic that we probably knew very little about beforehand. But I just wanted to note the importance that we take the wider community with us. We've certainly got our Dark Skies, passionate people who have done some wonderful submissions to the long-term plan. But there's the wider community who perhaps don't have all of the information and don't quite understand how this all fits together. And I think that we have thought about this very carefully and we have weighed it up very carefully, and I think we've done a very good job in that regard. I concur with our colleague Councillor O'Malley around that agility to adapt as the technology changes, although I do acknowledge that at some point you have to put a line in the sand. I welcome the fact that in the tender documents there does appear to be flexibility for that innovation. And I particularly want to note the concern of those who are elderly and have issues with eyesight and driving at night and seeing at night. And that the 3,000 kelvins does actually address that to some degree. And also the sensitivity of our wildlife, because there is a lot of unknowns in this. And the wildlife has got to be front and centre as well, because it's a very important part of our economy. So I just make those notes, but thank you for all your work that's gone into this to date, and we'll continue.
Thank you. Right of reply, do you want to say anything, Councillor? I'll now put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Final items for the Chair. Does anyone have any matters that they wish to raise for me to report back on? Councillor Hawkins.
Just a question, and it has been raised, I think, in this forum previously when we were speaking about the setting of speed limits and NZTA. There was an indication that perhaps NZTA would take on the same options that they have given us in terms of reducing speed limits on the state highway system.
Yes.
I did ask the Chair to follow up on that, and just it's a timely enough opportunity to remind us that we haven't got an answer.
We haven't got an answer. Thank you very much. I will ensure that that goes back this evening, and hopefully I'll get something either today or tomorrow for you. Thank you. I'll now call that meeting.